Welcome back to the wood shop. Today we're talking about planer safety. Planer safety is the next step on our procedure list where we've taken our piece of wood, we've cut it down to a manageable length on the miter saw, we've jointed an edge in a surface, we've taken our piece to the table saw and we've cut rough width, and now we can send it through the planer to achieve finished thickness and finished width. The planer acts as sort of like an upside down jointer. Our reference edge or surface will sit on the infeed table, and the cutters on the top of the planer will cut our piece nice and parallel, nice and smooth on the top, parallel to our reference edge or reference surface. The planer has an on-off switch, a speed selector, a hand wheel on the side to go up and down for different widths and thicknesses, and a height indicator. Our big green planer works much the same, except for instead of the cutter head moving up and down, the infeed and outfeed table move up and down on this planer. So the same, we have an on-off button, we have a switch that'll electronically move our table up and down, and we have a speed selector lever. The counter on this planer makes it pretty easy to make repeatable cuts on the planer. Every planer has an in-feed roller and an out-feed roller. The in-feed roller, just as its name says, is going to take our piece into the planer for us. It's going to put down pressure on that workpiece and it's going to feed it through. The out-feed roller, slightly lower, is going to take our cut workpiece and it's going to send it out the back. Guess how far apart those rollers are? About a foot. So you never want to send a piece of wood through the planer that's less than 1 foot long. Sending a piece of wood through the planer that is less than 1 foot long will get hung up between the two rollers. It's neither being fed with the infeed roller nor being pushed out with the outfeed roller. It'll sit in between those two rollers and get chewed up. A piece of wood that is too short for the planer could look like this. Gets really chewed up like a garburator inside the planer and can do some great damage to those cutter knives inside the planer. If you do have to plane something that's less than 10 millimeters thick and you're worried about it flexing and possibly flexing up into the cutter head, good to use a stiff backboard with some double-sided tape or maybe even a cleat that you can nail to the end of the board to make sure that your thin piece doesn't kick back, and send it through with that nice stiff back board underneath it. We never want to cut more than about 3 millimeters per pass on the planer. If we overload the planer, we try to cut too much wood off at one time, the planer may shut down, we may damage the knives, or the wood will just get stuck and could even kick back. Our depth of cut is indicated by this little red gauge. When we contact the initial gauge with our piece of wood, we'll have a readout with this little red gauge. Not all planers have this, like our big green planer over there. We always want to check our stock again for staples, grit, other junk. If I've glued a bunch of pieces together and I want to send them through the planer, I have to make sure I scrape that glue off. Glue hardens, cures, harder than wood and can damage the knives of a planer, so we really want to make sure that we scrape off that excess glue with a glue scraper. Any defects in the wood like loose knots can wiggle loose while we're planing and also do some real damage to the planer. It's going to make a really ugly noise. Sometimes the vacuum system gets plugged on a planer. If that's the case, never wipe the shavings off with your hand. You're going to stop the machine, raise it up, and then use a brush to wipe the wood shavings off the table. The feed rollers on this machine push the wood down really hard to make sure it doesn't kick back out. We want to make sure that our fingers are not underneath our stock when we feed it in. They could get pinched against the table. And we want to make sure that our loose clothing is tucked in and not anywhere near those feed rollers while we're feeding it into the planer. If the wood does get stuck in the planer while I'm planing, usually the easiest way to get it sent through is to raise it up a little. If I happen to raise it up on a wedge piece, it'll usually carry on through the planer. But if I raise it up and it stops, the best way is to turn off the machine, wait till it comes to a stop, and then push the stock through with another piece of stock, or if it's sticking out, simply pull the piece out. So before I use the planer, I'm going to put in my hearing protection. It's a very noisy machine. I am going to tuck in my loose clothing, make sure it's not anywhere near those feed rollers. And we're going to make a couple of passes. So I like to plane my finished width first. The reason for that being is if I do my finished thickness and it gets really thin and then I go to do an edge, sometimes it can get a little wobbly. So I like to do my finished width. Now remember, width is across the grain, the surface grain. So I'm going to take my reference edge, my check mark edge, I'm going to put it down against the infeed table. I'm going to raise up the planer just until the workpiece goes in, and I can see from my dial indicator how much I'm cutting at a time. Remember, we only plane 3 millimeters per pass. So this is ready to go. I'm going to keep my fingers on top of the workpiece. It's ready to feed in. With every pass, I'm going to move the workpiece around that infeed table so I don't wear one spot out on the planer. And I'm also going to stand to the side as I use the planer. I never want to stand in front of my piece of wood as I'm using the planer in case it kicks back. And I never ever want to look into a running planer. It's like staring down the barrel of a loaded shotgun. Simple as that, I retrieve my workpiece out the back and carry on until I've reached my finished width. Finished thickness works exactly the same. I put my reference checkmark surface against the infeed table. I change the height of my planer till my dial indicator is just moving. Flip the machine on. A really good idea to mark with a pencil what your finished thickness is going to be, what your finished width is going to be, so when you reach those marks, you've got it. When I'm making a second pass, the hand roller on this planer indicates that each one revolution of the hand wheel is 1/16 of an inch. That's pretty safe. So I can do a full revolution for softwoods, probably a half revolution for hardwoods. And our final step is going to be finished length on the miter saw. We would never cut end grain on a planer. So that covers planer safety. If you have any questions, please email me. Complete the quiz on D2L. Stay safe and God bless.